Good evening. Thank you to our audience for joining us online and to our speakers here at the Arizona State University California Center at the historic Herald-Examiner building. With great respect, Zócalo Public Square acknowledges the Yuhaviatum, the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory of Yaangna that we now know as downtown Los Angeles. We honor their elders, past and present, and the Yuhaviatum descendants who are part of the Gabrieleño Tongva and the Fernandeño Tataviam nations. We recognize that the Tongva are still here, and we are committed to lifting up their stories, culture, and community. As Kuyam, we recognize our responsibility and obligation to care for their land. I'm Sarah Rothbard, and I'm editor-in-chief of Zócalo Public Square, a creative unit of Arizona State University. At Zócalo, our mission is to connect people to ideas and to each other. Everything we do is free, and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, on all the major podcast platforms, and on YouTube, where you can also subscribe for our latest events. Tonight's program is part of our ongoing partnership with the California Wellness Foundation, exploring health equity in rural communities around the state. It includes events and essays. Our latest piece explored the state's post-carbon future. We're especially excited to be publishing and hosting an event this spring around the question, what does the end of mass incarceration mean for prison towns? Tonight, we're asking, can California solve its air quality inequality? Our moderator is Saul Gonzalez, whose career has spanned television and radio from PBS to NPR. Reporting on topics including human rights abuses, homelessness, and wildfires, he's earned numerous Emmy and Golden Mike Awards, and now spends his time traveling around his home state for KQED's The California Report. Over to you, Saul.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all who are watching for joining us tonight. We're going to get to some really important issues with some fantastic guests. So let me tell you who they are. First off, we have Manuel Pastor. He's a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity at the University of Southern California. And he's the director of the USC Equity Research Institute. His research has focused on economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities and on social movements seeking to change those realities. He is the co-author with Chris Benner of Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter. I'm sure we'll be talking a bit about that later. Dr. Catherine Garoupa White is the executive director of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, which works to restore clean air to the San Joaquin Valley. It's the nation's most polluted air basin for fine particles. I did not know that. Catherine also lectures in geography at CSU Stanislaus and Columbia College. She's an activist scholar dedicated to environmental justice and health equity. And finally, Mary Nichols is the former chair of the California Air Resources Board. She served as chair from 2007 to 2020 and led the board in crafting California's internationally recognized climate action plan. In her 45-year career as an environmental attorney, she's worked with the Natural Resources Defense Council, the U.S. EPA's Office of Air and Radiation, in the Clinton administration, and UCLA's Institute of Environmental and Sustainability. She is currently a visiting fellow at the Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy. All right, and I just scratched the surface. There's so many things I could say about them, but we'll find out more in the conversation. Before we go on, I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight, and I want to encourage the audience to start sending us questions. We're looking at them in real time, so craft a good question about air quality. Try to stay on topic, if you will, and we'll do our best to get to it toward the end of this. And so start sending them along. Okay, big picture question here. And Mary Nichols, I think I'll go to you for this one.
Okay.
But everybody, feel free to chime in at any time.
Sure.
When I take a breath of California air in 2022, how does it compare, generally speaking, to air quality if I had taken that breath in 1985, 1975? Yeah. Is it cleaner air, and how much cleaner?
It is cleaner air than it was, certainly much cleaner than it was for people who grew up here in the 60s, the 70s. I moved out here in 1971, and there were almost 250 days in the average year where we violated the federal standards for clean air, and more days than that when you couldn't actually see the mountains to the east of us. And although visibility isn't the same thing as a health effect, it's a pretty good indicator of where there's a lot of particles in the air. So yes, the air quality has improved, and it's measurably, on whatever standards there are, it has improved. But we know more than we did about how harmful air is to people. We also have pockets of badness where people are exposed to unhealthy amounts of particularly toxic air contaminants, which are not the things that we measure at the big regional scale. So things that are actually carcinogens or have very acute effects on people's health. So the picture is not all a steady line in the direction of progress by any means. But if you look at what this place was like, and then you think about the numbers of people who live here today and the number of vehicles that are out there on the roads, we would have all choked a long time ago, as would the economy of this region, if we, the people of this area, hadn't made serious efforts to clean it up.
Yeah, I just think of that 1970s archival film of LA where you would just see you couldn't even see the Hollywood sign. Downtown LA was just hidden behind this Venusian smog or fog, so it looked like another planet.
Yep.
I would just add that.
Go ahead.
That is the Los Angeles I grew up in.
That's the Los Angeles.
Grew up in La Puente, which is just east of East LA. And it's a place where the smog would actually funnel through the San Gabriel Valley on the way to its dumping ground in the Inland Empire. Okay. And when I was growing up, there was so much asthma amongst the children. There was so much lack of visibility. You can describe it, but it's different being a kid looking up and saying, not just that you can't see the mountains, but you can't really see something 500 feet away because of the lack of visibility. It has gotten significantly better. And I think the challenge for California right now is how do we take that level of attention that we paid, do more, do more on climate, and in particular do more on the topic of this particular session, which is environmental inequality. Because what's become apparent was that we were documenting well the overall environmental quality issues. And in the last 25 years, we've begun to document how deep the disparities are. And it's important for people to understand that those disparities are not just from income, because there's a tendency to think that when you look at uneven air quality, that maybe it's just poorer neighborhoods that have worse air, more toxics, etc. But in the research, what you find is that the gradient of exposure by race is actually steeper than the gradient of exposure by income, meaning that this is a reflection of structural racism in our siting practices, where we've put our freeways, all the kind of riskscape that's emerged. And so it's heartening to see that the state in recent years has been taking the environmental justice task as seriously as the air quality task.
You've put a lot on the table. We're going to come back to that in a bit. Very quickly, though.
That's what academics do.
So you remember those days where you couldn't go outside, like at school, you would have those days where you couldn't go outside to the playground. You had to stay inside, right?
Literally that, but also not being able to see 500 feet away and saying, not realizing that, what is that doing to my lungs as well as to my experience.
Catherine with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, tackle the question. I mean, what's changed in your part of California, where millions of people live, over the past 20, 30 years, or you pick the time span?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the honest answer would be not enough has changed. Relief hasn't come quickly enough for the San Joaquin Valley as a region, so we suffer epidemic levels of sickness due to our air pollution problem. And as our speakers have already mentioned, it's not distributed equally. There are particular neighborhoods where people of color, low-income communities, and all of these other social and economic vulnerabilities are layered. So not only do we have a persistent and ongoing challenge, we now see accelerating climate impacts that are in fact making the situation worse. So in the summertime in the San Joaquin Valley, where we have a lot of the smog or the ozone pollution because it's high heat, we're now having extreme heat and catastrophic wildfires that are pumping all kinds of particles into the air at the same time that people are breathing unhealthy levels of ozone. And we know from the science that those impacts are only going to increase.
For people who don't know, where does the pollution come from in the Central Valley? Because I think a lot of people think, well, it's agricultural land, it's wide open spaces, it's big sky country. So where does all that stuff in the atmosphere, where's it coming from versus in LA or San Diego or San Francisco?
So the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition attributes our root causes of air pollution to three main categories that we use the acronym DOA, which to some people is dead on arrival. For us in the San Joaquin Valley, it's development, oil, and agriculture. So sprawling land use and transportation planning, particularly warehouses, distribution centers, magnet sources where, again, pollution can be concentrated. We have an IKEA distribution center in the San Joaquin Valley, but our whole region doesn't have an IKEA store, right? So again, we're disproportionately getting those sources concentrated there. The oil industry has a very long history in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley. Some of the most productive oil fields in the United States are in Kern County. So energy production absolutely has produced a lot of pollution. And then as you already mentioned, agriculture, but particularly industrialized agriculture, right? Mass scale agriculture with hundreds of millions of pesticides applied, fertilizers, very intensive agriculture.
And very big machines kicking up a lot of stuff into the atmosphere, a lot of dust in particular matter, right?
And
yes.
Could
Yes,
I
Mary
just
Nichols.
pick up on something that Catherine said before also, which is about the interaction between the pollutants and heat, because global warming, we know, is increasing the temperatures. We measure increasing temperatures every year now in the valley and in LA. That heat obviously has an impact all by itself. That is, people die literally from heat exposure. But it also makes the air pollution problem worse, because every drop of pollution that's emitted to the air is going to produce more smog as the temperatures go up. So we've got this vicious circle now where, because of global warming, the exposures that people are experiencing on the ground are getting worse. And so despite the heroic efforts that have been made by groups like Catherine's and by the air quality districts and by the ARB, the progress is much slower than it should be. And the whole global warming issue gives us a reason to focus on it.
Just one second. We're going to return to global warming in a bit, and climate change and how it intersects with air quality issues that we've been discussing for many years. But going back to your experience with fighting for cleaner air, you've been involved in this struggle going back to the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of different places, in a lot of different ways. What do you think when it comes to thinking about the different impacts of poor air quality in different communities that we got wrong, that you all weren't talking about in 1980 or 75 or 85, that now is very front and center in the conversation?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One, I think, is that the Clean Air Act, which is where I came in the early 1970s, had the focus on regional air quality because it was a federal law and they were concerned about inequities among regions in the United States. And they recognized, science told us, as is true, that pollution travels over many, many miles. And so instead of focusing on the individual sources or on the people themselves and what they were being exposed to. They measured it in terms of these broad swaths of geography. This is Catherine and I were talking before we came on today. So the vision was that you would have a regional air quality approach and not look at the individual cities or communities or neighborhoods because that was considered to be sort of the fair way to evaluate how we were doing. And every region in the country was entitled to be protected to the same degree. What that didn't take into account is that at the local level and where people actually are breathing this stuff, there really are differences. And it didn't take into account that not all pollutants are equally distributed. So some types of pollutants, like for example, the toxic chemicals that come out of diesel vehicles are going to be more harmful. There are more of them and more people will breathe them when they're right next to the freeway or the port or the distribution center. And so we have to kind of reconfigure the way we look at these things, but the Federal Clean Air Act was not written to do that.
Manuel, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, a couple things. I think the comments of the colleagues are really inspiring in two ways. First, to repeat in a way something that Mary just said, is when you're trying to ask what's going on in a region, you want to set your air monitoring to capture the average. And instead, you're not picking up on the hot spots. Right. The second thing, and I think this takes off from Catherine's comments, you talked about DOA, development, oil, and agriculture. What we've realized is that it does mean dead on arrival because those economic interests do not want their profits and business models to be challenged by people who want higher wages, more sustainable agriculture, or a better environment. And so the modern environmental justice movement did not just come out of people doing research and noticing the disparities that existed. It came out of protest movements that said, we don't want more facilities sited in our neighborhoods, and then they began to demand the kind of research and the political action and the policy chanch. And so
I think of Mothers of East LA, for instance, in the 80s. They were fighting the Lancer Project. This is going way back in time.
Oh, yeah.
But would that be an example of that, the kind of swirling of the neighborhood, of the community activism?
Perfect example, because the Mothers of East LA not only resisted a prison being put in their neighborhood, they teamed up with concerned citizens of South LA, a largely black organization, to resist an incinerator being put in Vernon. So from the beginning, it was also an attempt amongst these environmental justice folks to both identify the problems that were going on in their neighborhoods, but to build ties across race, across income, across geography, to build a larger movement for environmental justice. And that is certainly what we've seen happen in the Central Valley.
Do you think, very quick, we're going to go to questions, we're getting some questions coming through, so we're going to come to your questions in just a bit, but just to follow up to you, Manuel, do you think that, what's changed in terms of the activism, say, between the 80s and the 70s and now? Is there more savviness there? Is there more alliance building? Or is it something else entirely?
Well, that's such a big question.
I know. My apologies. Big question, little time. I'm sorry. It's the nature of the beast.
I think that there's a remarkable level of sophistication, particularly amongst the environmental justice organizations in the state of California, that they've been able to combine the organizing with working with researchers to document the problems, and also with working with policymakers to try to change some of the policies. So I think there's work to be done, but the fact that there's a California Environmental Justice Alliance that brings together all of these different groups to try to lobby successfully for policy in Sacramento, that's a development that did not exist in the 80s, when it was really a lot of grassroots groups that didn't yet have developed all of the skills that are necessary to move policy.
Well, one of the things that's changed is they've had a lot of success. Not enough, but success builds on more success.
And we should talk. I mean, we go into this conversation, we should acknowledge there, as you said in the beginning, there's been a lot of success over the last 30, 40 years. We should recognize that. But I want to get to a question from one of the, yes?
Just yesterday, a campaign that's been going on in Los Angeles for the last decade called Stand LA has actually successfully gotten the city council to ban oil drilling in the city of Los Angeles.
Right.
That is a huge victory that was inconceivable a decade ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I supported it, but it wasn't like I was saying, oh yeah, you're going to win. I didn't think that would be possible, and yet it has been. So you're right, the success has given groups a sense of more power, of more possibility about what they can do.
Catherine, when it comes to the Central Valley and San Joaquin Valley, is there any, and this relates to some questions we've gotten, we got a question about regenerative farming and whether those regenerative farming practices could help with air pollution issues in the valley. And just more generally, when it comes to corporate agriculture in the valley, is there anything that could change farming practices, farming infrastructure that could help with cleaning up the air?
Absolutely. You know, there's definitely a growing movement around concepts like agroecology. So trying to work more with natural environments and natural systems. I think scaling practices to the ecosystem, right? Not growing crops that are water intensive if we don't have the water available. I think the biggest challenge, as Manuel pointed to earlier, is the political will, right? And the willingness of those industries to actually transition their practices away from these resource-intensive ways of doing it to ways that are more in line with what natural environments can sustain.
But can you do that and still sustain kind of the agricultural output we've become accustomed to? I mean,
to some degree, yes, and to some degree, no. I mean, the agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley today is not sustainable. That's why we have subsidence. That's why we have the worst air pollution in the United States, right? Because we are over-exploiting the system. We are putting more pollution into it than it can possibly sustain. So agriculture has to change, right? Other factors like the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to some degree are going to force some of the farmland to become fallow. Ideally, it would be a lot better if we crafted regionally a vision for what type of agriculture we wanted in our region, because we're in a Goldilocks zone of a Mediterranean climate where we can grow things that lots of other places can't be grown. And that is something precious that we should be working to preserve, where for the last 150 years, it really has been incredibly exploitive of people and land.
And another very valley-centric question that we got in, and that is geography and air pollution there. Do some of the pollution problems there come from coastal areas? I mean, is this drift from the Bay Area or from the greater LA area into the San Joaquin Valley?
So this is a super common question that we get a lot. There has been research that has been done.
Common questions are good too, by the way.
There has been research done by the San Joaquin Valley Air District to look at how much pollution might be drifting over from China or how much might be coming from the Bay Area. The honest truth is most of it is homegrown. The vast majority of it is coming from the San Joaquin Valley.
Oh, really? So it's not, you can't, because I guess with Owens Valley as well too, right? Is in their pollution problems there?
There's pollution generated everywhere in the state, but if you look at the measurements, it's going to be mostly the local stuff. Yeah.
Manuel?
I think the one somewhat of an exception to this is the so-called Inland Empire, where a lot does get pushed from the coastal areas out to Riverside and San Bernardino in two ways, both direct kind of air patterns, but also the fact that they bear the burden of the logistics industry, the warehousing, the trucks, the diesel traffic. And while we've done a better job of sort of trying to eliminate diesel trucks out of the ports, you know, they take the long haul through the San Gabriel and into Valley and into the Inland Empire. And that's something where we really need to solve that by thinking about interregional equity as well as neighborhood equity.
Mary Nichols, I promised to get to climate change. We've come to climate change. Mary Nichols, how do you think that is going to, the increased focus, rightful increased focus on climate change, how does that intersect with the longer conversation we've had about just plain old air pollution?
So this is one of the reasons why environmental justice is such a hot topic now, in addition, of course, to successful organizing and to the fact that the legislature now has a much different complexion and makeup than it did back in 1970 when I first moved out here. Just in, over the years, it's changed, and we have more people who grew up in smoggy areas and or come from disadvantaged backgrounds, or at least first generation, being in positions of that kind of power. Taking the reins of our political system. But the connection is that to take successful action on climate change, you have to deal with the inequalities, and you have to deal with the sources of the same combustion pollutants that are causing localized distress, because they're also causing the greenhouse gas emissions. And so ever since the first AB 32, the California Global Warming Solutions Act back in 2006, there has been this connection between environmental justice as an issue, but also as a way of thinking about how to solve the problem that had never existed before. And it's given the air pollution agencies a whole new focus of their activities. They are now required, and they're really learning how to consult with communities when they are developing their plans, and not just doing them on a technical basis, in-house, looking at what you can achieve with changes in fuels or changes in processes, but really looking at what the communities that these facilities are in want to see happen.
Manuel, I know you want to say something. I'm picking up on the language of your body when you're ready to talk.
Well, it's that the inequality issue is not disconnected from the air quality issue in several different ways. There's a great article that some friends of mine did, academics. I'm hardly ever jealous of other academics, but this was the best title, and I wish I had thought of it. And it was, Is Environmental Justice Good for White Folks? And what they did was they looked at metropolitan regions around the United States, and they found out that where there was more inequality and exposure, there was just more exposure. That when people thought it was being placed in someone else's neighborhood, they just tolerated more of it.
Worse.
It's also true in the state that when you think about who is an environmentalist, our notion is that it must be some skinny white guy in bicycle pants. But if you look at the polling,
stereotyping.
but if you look at the polling data from the Public Policy Institute of California, and you ask Californians the question, do you think that global warming is a very serious threat to the quality of life and the economy in California? About half of white Californians say yes. 57 to 58% of Black and Asian Californians say yes, and about almost 2/3 of Latino Californians say yes. Because when they think about global warming, they're also thinking about the localized pollution. So there are all sorts of good political reasons to be paying attention to this, for the reasons that Mary was mentioning, because so many of the legislators now grew up like I did in La Puente, with lots of pollution around, going, I know this is not good for me.
Well, I got to say, I don't think of the skinny white guy anymore. When I think of like the California environmentalist, I think of a person of color. I think of somebody who's not from Brentwood or Santa Monica, but somebody who's from La Puente or from one of the port communities, San Pedro, Rubidoux. So I think that's we've kind of turned that page, no?
Well,
Yes, no?
I'm glad.
Mary, do you have a thought?
Well, if you look at who's actually lobbying in Sacramento, and as Manuel said, I mean, we had an issue on the ballot during the depths of the last big depression where a group of oil companies sponsored an initiative to suspend the California Global Warming Program because of very high rates of unemployment. And so it said, until the unemployment levels come down, we're just not going to do any more of this climate stuff because it's obviously too expensive. It was overwhelmingly defeated, but disproportionately it was defeated in communities of color.
And Catherine, how do you feel about just kind of the state of air quality activism and climate activism in your part of California. And by the way, you could talk about other places. I'm not, please don't feel you're just here to talk about the Central Valley. But have you seen changes there? Is it remarkably stronger than a lot of us would think? Or are people basically, they got other issues. They're just trying to survive day to day. They're trying to put food on their tables, provide for their families, and that's enough of a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd answer that in a few different ways. I'd say at the macro level, I would absolutely credit environmental justice activism with increasing the recognition of racial disparities and air inequalities. And I think that that is an important achievement to be able to honor. And at the same time, environmental justice isn't just about recognition, it's also about fundamentally changing the outcomes and the distributions of what are sometimes referred to as benefits and burdens, right? So both the pollution, but also the nice things, the amenities, the park space, the things that we want in our community. So I think it's important that we've made that progress. I think that there's still a lot more progress to be made. Part of what I love about working for the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition is that we are a multi-ethnic, multi-generational, very powerful movement that has existed for a couple of decades now, that is really about sustaining the vision for the things that we want to see in our community. And while I think it's also significant that we're at this place now where we're talking about recognizing community members as experts and really ground truthing the data that air agencies are producing. At the same time, I think, again, we're still operating at the theory level, and we are not actually directly seeing those improvements in our communities.
Do you think the particular set of concerns there in that region get the kind of attention they should get from, take your pick, municipal power centers like San Francisco and LA, Sacramento, Washington, D.C., Mary Nichols, current colleagues and past colleagues? I mean, do you feel like you have a voice, and as importantly, you're being listened to?
I feel like we have a voice, and it's important that we're being listened to. I also teach California geography, so I'm very aware of the fact that the San Joaquin Valley economically is a sacrifice zone where a lot of the unwanted things from other parts of the state and the country have been purposely cited there for a whole variety of factors. And so, again, we still have those ongoing challenges to deal with.
I want to turn to an issue we've gotten a couple of questions on. One from a celebrity viewer, Masimoto, the writer, from your part of the state. And it's about, I think when we think about how we're going to solve both climate change and air quality issues, a lot of us immediately turn to EVs, electric vehicles. That's one kind of salvation. Mas asked about them, and I'm sure he echoes many others who are listening or viewing this about EVs, aren't they going to, if we just go all in on them, is that the solution? And I will say, as a kind of a bit of a, I support EVs, but a bit of a skeptic in terms of targets not missed in the past. I mean, not hit in the past. I mean, we've been talking about EVs for about 30 years in this state. They're only at around 2 or 3% adoption, right, in California. Correct me if I'm wrong on the figures. So talk about that.
We're doing better.
Okay, well, it's still not a huge amount.
Sales levels are above 10%.
And EVs are not at a price point where a lot of people can afford them. I see a lot more Teslas out there compared to things that a lot of other people can afford. So take that on. I'm looking to you. I mean, do you think, do we oversell that technology? Is it where it should be? And what do we get right and wrong about it?
Well, first of all, we're human, and so we always want to believe that there's a technology solution.
We do.
And we're Californians, and in general, people in California kind of like cars or trucks or SUVs. That's part of our history, right? So having a zero emission vehicle, which was once a dream, and then it was a law that really couldn't be enforced, is now actually a real thing, in the sense that every major manufacturer is actually producing EVs, and they are really trying to market them. So it's not a fake, it's a real thing, and governments are putting serious money. Gavin Newsom is planning to put a very large share of the current surplus into building the infrastructure and helping to keep the prices down at levels where they would be relatively affordable. I mean, they're not going to be affordable if you can't buy a car at all, but even then, they're looking at ways to allow for more electric bicycles and to make transit vehicles electric, and maybe most important, going back to the trucks, which are fumigating everybody in their path, those are going to have to be zero emission in just a few years, and manufacturers are actually designing and building those vehicles. This is all necessary. It's a good thing. It's going to happen. It's going to take, a few years. But if you had asked me even like 10 years ago, did I think that by 2030, most of the vehicles on the roads would be electric or zero emission, because they could be a fuel cell or a combination?
Or hydrogen.
I would say, I would have said, wow, it would be nice, but that's probably not possible. Now it really is possible, and I think governments at all levels, cities, are really pushing to make that happen. But it's not enough. That's the thing. That is still not going to meet
We have a question coming in now about subsidies and of whether they're sufficient or not.
Well, I think the whole thing with EV at this point is to stop thinking about the technological side of it and think more about the social side of it. So we need to develop a secondhand market in EVs so that as people are handing their car down, and that the deep subsidies should go to low-income people, because they're going to retire a clunker that's heavily polluting if they move into an EV. We need to get charging stations into apartment buildings or into shared spaces. We need to electrify buses as well as trucks. So I think you're right. We tend to think, God, if we just had this technological silver bullet, we could give up all the pain of the actual social adjustment. But we need to think about how this actually plays out.
Any other comments on that?
I would add, thinking about a region like the San Joaquin Valley that is very rural, thinking about tailored solutions for people who have to travel really long distances, and we have really great locally innovated models. So shout out to Mayor Ray Leon in the city of Huron for innovating Green Raiteros, which is a rideshare program for people who live in the city of Huron, to be able to have access to zero emission vehicles when they need to go to things like doctor's appointments. We also have programs like farm worker van pool programs, that those van pools could be electrified in order to make sure that we're really serving the needs of the populations in the valley.
I got to go to you about one big transportation project that's taking place in the Central Valley, and that is high-speed rail. And candidly, when you look at that, I'm sure you drive by the construction site many times, or you've seen it. When you look at that, do you think, oh, that's a solution to our air pollution problems in the Central Valley? Or do you think, oh, that's a white elephant in the making, and we could be spending that money on a lot of other things to help for higher air quality in the San Joaquin Valley?
My honest assessment would be yes to both.
Yes to both, okay.
Yes.
That's
I'm
how I
all
answer
about
a lot of
trains.
questions.
I lived in Germany for a while. Having really efficient, low emission or zero emission train systems is a great way to get people around. But this project has been going on for an incredibly long time, and there's been way too much money spent on it. That
could have been spent on other things.
Absolutely.
That maybe more modest projects that had a more of a tangible effect on air quality. And I'm not putting words in your mouth.
And that would be more accessible to the average person instead of the people that are going to be able to afford the ticket of the high-speed rail once it's completed.
Is there anything, I'm sure you each have your criticisms of corporate California and what it's done wrong, and industrial society and capitalism. Do you have anything for the conservatives who might be watching, who are watching, I'm sure? Is there anything you could say where, that's an interesting market-based solution to what we see here, and that's an interesting way to close the air quality inequity gap in the state? Is there anything at all that you see, or is that not the case?
Well, I'm a big fan of the low-carbon fuel standard in California. Back in the day when the federal government was trying to force people to use ethanol and to dump large amounts of it into gasoline, which did not have a good impact either on climate or on emissions in many cases. California, with the help of some faculty members from the University of California, designed a market-based program where the oil industry is required to reduce the carbon content of the fuels that they sell for vehicles in California. They can do it either by investing in lower carbon fuels like renewable biodiesel, for example, which is made from waste basically waste oil in general, or they could buy credits from companies that are manufacturing all kinds of innovative clean fuels and help build the market for those in California. So California really is the center of innovation on zero emission or very low emission fuels, from everything like algae to, various kinds of bio crops and stuff, all of which are little niche markets right now. But if you look at what's happened, the refining industry in California is converting to making renewable fuels for aircraft, where they're not using petroleum fuel at all anymore for real flights. I mean, this is actually happening, and it's something where some pretty clever policy by the state, which was resisted ferociously by the oil industry, I might add. I mean, they fought it at every turn. But once it became law and they couldn't fight it anymore, they have been complying, and it's actually making a difference both economically and environmentally.
All right.
Well, I think what Mary's talking about is a kind of sweet spot where you have pretty strict standards and you're trying to force the technological change and then allow the companies to figure out how they're going to meet some of those standards. But of course, this gives me an opportunity to talk about my new book, Solidarity Economics, which does pick up on some of these issues. And there's 3 points about it I would lift up. This is the typical academic taking advantage of answering a question you didn't ask. So first, we need to stop talking about the environment and start talking about our environment. This is an environment we make by rules, by power, by markets. Second, we need to start realizing that there's not a trade-off in the economy, really, between promoting equity and promoting prosperity, and there's not a trade-off between promoting environmental justice and improving air quality, a point I made earlier. And third, this is really Catherine's point, that you don't make any of these changes unless you muster the political power to make them happen. So even the low carbon fuel standard is a challenge to oil companies. That's what winds up making change.
What do you do about the people who don't agree with you, who represent a good portion of the population? What do you do about them?
Well, there is a thing called democracy and voting. Right. And I think that what it means is that we need to be doing good organizing. We need to be making solid arguments. We need to make sure that people are aware that these are important issues and doing what we can. I mean, the shift in California to paying attention to the environment and the shift in California to paying attention to environmental inequality have been the result of organizing and shifting the political calculus to make it happen. It's been about persuasion, it's been about research, and it's just been about winning elections.
We've gotten a question about land use policy and this issue. It's without getting too much into the weeds and zoning regulations and all the rest. Is that a fundamental solution as well, just changing how we use our land, where we put things? That's going to become an increasingly critical response to keeping our air clean and climate change.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a simple answer to that, yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it needs to be, because if you continue to require people to move farther and farther away from where they work or from where there's opportunity, you're also making it impossible for them to use mass transit in many cases, or to live a healthy life by walking to various kinds of amenities. It's a form of discrimination, really, that we certainly see in other parts of the world, where you don't have thoughtful land use that makes it possible to have communities where people can be healthy and also have access to everything that they need. There's been work done for years back in I think the 80s, the Energy Commission did some modeling work that showed how compact urban communities, walkable, livable communities, not talking about, high rises with no trees, but talking about places that you and I would look at and say, yeah, that's a really nice neighborhood. Also, use less energy overall. They don't require as much energy for the houses, for the buildings themselves. You can get around with less emissions, and so yes, it has to be part of the solution.
Catherine, on another issue, you spoke. Your first comments were about climate change. You folded climate change into your first response to a question, and how it's frightening when you look at the projections from the Central Valley in terms of what temperature rise and all the rest. I think there was a UC Merced study that came out recently about, we talk about 1 or 2 degree temperature rise, like 8 degrees, which is enormous. Do you fear that if those changes occur, they basically just wipe out what we've done in terms of air quality issues and plus create a bunch of other problems? Is that like, if you plop yourself in the Central Valley of the year 2050, what is your fear?
I mean, I think there's certainly a risk of that. And at the same time, as people have already spoken to, we need to have hope that things can be different. There are a lot of solutions. There are a lot of things that we can transform and change now so that in 2050, that won't be our reality. And community design is also a fundamental aspect of making sure that we have resilient communities where people will be protected regardless of what happens. Dr. Pastor talked earlier about the campaign to have health and safety setbacks between oil and gas wells and where people live, right? Trying to create separation between where people are and where the pollution is coming from. I do also quickly want to touch on the question about market-based mechanisms, because in the San Joaquin Valley particularly, I have seen how market-based mechanisms disproportionately concentrate more pollution in our region because of the way that the schemes are run, and fundamentally because a lot of our local agencies and our regional air district are captured by industry essentially, and are working hand in hand with the oil industry to create credit systems that then they use to trade to be able to increase their pollution when it's all just a paper game and the emissions are going up, but there aren't any actual reductions. So when I think of a hopeful vision and solidarity economics and what can we create in the San Joaquin Valley, I have to hold that up against the everyday political reality that I have to confront, right? That our decision makers are often working more closely with the polluting industries than they are to represent the majority of the people that are living in our region.
And those forces know how to exercise power and how to wield power, and they've been used to doing it for a very long time, whether it's big ag, big oil, right? I mean, look at Kern County, right? And the petroleum industry's clout there. So it sounds like you're saying, so when you hear things like emission credits and kind of market-based approach, you think, that's no solution.
No, I don't think it's a solution, and I think it's part of what is causing the inequality. It's part of what's concentrating the pollution in low-income communities and communities of color, because it allows them to take credit for something that happened in some other place.
Yes.
There's nothing about markets that guarantee equity. And you need to have the safeguards in these programs to make sure that you don't get these inequitable results. Those safeguards are not that hard to design or put in, but they do get resisted. And I think that's been the challenge. I wanted to say one other thing, and it kind of comes from what Mary was saying also about compact development and your question about quote unquote the other side, which is one of the things that happens with compact development is there's a lot of NIMBYism that resists it. And so beginning to communicate to people who are fearful of that development that, it's not someone else who's going to move into your neighborhood. It actually might be your kids. It's our neighborhood. That when our neighborhoods are more diverse, they're stronger, better on energy, more affordable housing, better workforce, et cetera. But the way we're going to get there is through a combination of persuasion and, frankly, power.
Yeah, and I also think of by the way, we have like 100 years of urban planning behind us, and it's not like we're going to change our communities like that when I hear about.
But some things could change pretty quickly. COVID caused a lot of people to realize that that living alone is not necessarily healthy. And whole families that I know, including mine, realized that we were much better off when we were sharing a household together and taking care of each other than living in separate houses. So I was able to persuade my son and daughter-in-law and my grandson to come and live with me. That was wonderful for me. But
That's going well? That's nice to hear. Really? Is it going well?
But it was also good for them. Absolutely. And honestly, when people that I know of my age heard about it, they all wanted to know how we did it and could they do it. And changes in zoning laws are actually a big factor in making that happen.
I'm doing a project on that very issue right now about some big changes in zoning laws in single-family neighborhoods. One of the solutions that came to mind is, you often hear people think, well, when it comes to our vehicle, how we use our vehicles and transitioning from cars to EVs or hydrogen vehicles is just raise the price of gasoline. Tax it big. Of course, it has a huge impact on people who of fewer means, people who are working class. But given that, do any of you support that? Just like a big increase in the gas tax as a way to compel people to start shifting to other modes of transportation, to clean our air, to fight climate change? Is that like a no-duh solution, or is the pain too great for the most vulnerable?
Well, first of all, California already has high gasoline taxes and a higher price on gasoline than any other place.
Oh, yes.
But really what we want is not to punish people for driving. What we want is to enable them to switch to not having to drive or to cleaner vehicles and make it possible to finance those things. And I think that's the direction that we're moving in. It's how do you make the transition to where we really need to go and do it on a faster and more equitable basis than we've been able to do in the past. I think that's the question.
Well, here's my question again. That was a question, but I asked. But
is a
what I'm
tax
asking
the right
is
solution?
if there's a solution out there,
Yes.
a big solution, gas tax is one. There could be others, carbon tax, whatever, and how it plays out in the marketplace and in people's lives. Is there a solution that you would embrace that it's going to cause pain? And it might even cause a little bit more pain among people who aren't earning as much if we impose it on a societal level. Don't ask me the details. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. Is that something? Right? I mean, there is sacrifice here, no, to clean our air.
But why shouldn't the oil industry feel the
Okay,
pain, right? So
oil industry.
Let's remove their subsidies and their corporate welfare.
Okay.
That's what I would.
And then for people who aren't just people, choose your income level. I mean, is there something we're all going to, and we've gotten questions about this. What can I do, right? What can, me sitting at home watching this YouTube video with you fine, smart people, what can we do? So what can they do, painful or not?
So, one thing to think about with this idea of a carbon tax is what do you do with the money? And you can make investments that actually improve people's lives, particularly in low-income communities of color. You can rebate the money directly so that those who might have suffered from higher fossil fuel prices feel cushioned by that. It's kind of what we do with a child tax credit. And so I think those are the kinds of things we can do. And in terms of what viewers can do individually, it's to stop thinking individually and try to figure out with your neighbors how you can organize your community to accept more affordable housing, to change the zoning, to push for free public transportation, to get the state of California to pay special attention to hotspots, to make sure that we're dealing with the inequities in the Central Valley. This is not something that can be solved by a technological fix. And much as I try to change my own behavior isn't going to change things unless I link up with other people who want to change the constellation of power and change the policies that we pursue.
Manuel, are you like ready for a personal sacrifice? Would you like, it's going to hurt me, my pocketbook, but I'm going to buy that EV car. Maybe you drive an EV. I don't know. I don't. But I mean, I'm going to buy that EV car, or I'm going to install these new kind of kitchen equipment, or I mean, are you? What's your sacrifice?
Well, I do drive an EV.
Oh, right.
I try to
Bravo.
It's not a Tesla, it's a Bolt EV. Because
I didn't say anything.
I wanted to make sure that I had a bad battery. But I jumped in early because I realized that somebody with my income should help open up that market. When there's questions of changing zoning in our neighborhood, I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and do that. Because why is my neighborhood better than someone else's neighborhood? So I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I try not to be a hypocrite about the things that I am proposing.
Yeah, and I focused on you, and I didn't really mean to focus on you, but I did, was basically just,
tax the crap out of me, okay?
Yes, and buy his
It's
book.
fine.
And buy his book so he could afford to pay the taxes that you just heard about a few minutes ago. But is there something, okay, let me ask the question a different way. Is there something that we're not talking about when it comes to getting our arms around air pollution, how it affects various communities of color, different income groups, communities of color in particular, according to your research, climate change and the same issues? Is there something that you just wish, wow, this should be, Saul, you should be reporting on this more, this should be more in the public discourse, this should be on CNN a lot more? Is there something that we're just kind of not paying enough attention to? Yes, go.
Yes,
go,
there is.
go, tell me.
Okay.
People want to know.
Well, I mean, California, first of all, is not all south of San Francisco. Our state has a lot of land that's forested, and in addition to other natural lands and deserts and so forth that are of great value as recreation, as sources of clean air, and as places that people want to go to. And we need to be thinking about factoring those into the equation as well, because to the point about thinking more about the community, if people can get out and take a walk on a beach or go to the mountains or experience the pleasures of seeing natural spaces somewhere close to their communities, it gives them some release from the pressures of worrying about all these other issues all the time. It helps to build support for creating a more resilient community where people can live better lives. And those two things shouldn't be seen as like completely separate from each other. The economy, jobs, houses over here, and all that nature stuff over here. They are integrally connected to each other. And
the unified field theory of.
yes, exactly. And the fact that we mistreated the forests, and when they burn now, they burn so catastrophically, which is making everybody's air better, everybody's air worse, I should say, as well as destroying forested lands, is a consequence of bad thinking about those issues. And it really needs to get more attention and more support.
Well, Catherine, anything?
I think California has a lot of brilliant minds, and decision makers love to talk about the environmental leadership of the state of California. And I think, we have a huge opportunity to take action to show how we can really truly do that in this state. So tying this back to kind of the introduction that you gave me and some of the topics that we've touched on, I would particularly call out academics and decision makers in the state of California to do the type of integrated thinking that Mary was just talking about, and to engage in authentic dialogue and collaboration with people in environmental justice communities so that we can innovate and tailor those solutions together.
All right. Well, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Zócalo people, but we are about out of time. I wanted to thank our great guests and their patience with my questions, both articulate and otherwise. I want to thank all of you for watching. This video will be archived on the Zócalo YouTube channel, so check it out whenever you want. You can still keep on leaving questions, maybe even ask some questions, and we'll circle back to them. I want to thank the Zócalo staff for their generosity and their kindness and putting this on. Stay tuned to their future programming. It's always great here at Zócalo. I go to the website a lot myself. Thank you for joining us tonight, and breathe clean air. Good breathing to you.
Yeah.